paradrama tales.
$78,000, I said, sliding the folder across the mahogany table. Silence swallowed. The Thanksgiving chatter, as my sister's smug grin, vanished. In that electric moment, I realized every unspoken loan and hidden receipt was about to shatter the facade and our family's perfect veneer. I remember the moment like a slow-motion photograph. Natalie rose from her chair, her rehearsed smile glinting under the chandelier as she cleared her throat. And in that instant, every fork hovered midair. "We voted," she declared, voice crisp as fine china. "And you're not family anymore." A roar of approval thundered through the room. Cousins stamping their feet in mock triumph, Uncle Mitch lifting his wine glass in a toast, even Mom leaning back to laugh as if we were discussing nothing more serious than the weather. My heart pounded. The stuffing in my plate had turned to concrete, my mouth gone dry. I should have felt anger or shock. But what really took me by surprise was the casual brutality of it all, like watching a favorite old movie suddenly cut to static. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, and managed to quiet, "You actually rehearsed this." Natalie's grin widened, as though she'd won some secret prize, and Mom chimed in, "You've been toxic for years. We're finally done pretending." Their words were sharp enough to draw blood, but the real sting came from the silence of everyone else. My family's refusal to speak up, to say, "Wait, this went too far." Instead, applause met each barb. My father didn't even look at me. He simply sipped his beer and muttered, "Probably for the best." That line landed harder than any insult. I sat frozen, staring at my plate as the laughter swirled around me like shattered glass. In that charged lull, I realized how easily love can be rationed, how quickly gratitude can curdle into contempt when money changes hands behind closed doors. All those years of quietly bailing them out, dental emergencies, tuition bills, heating costs, had welded me into a role I never auditioned for, the family ATM. They'd thank me, yes, but always with a side of condescension, as if generosity were an obligation rather than a gift. And now they'd voted me out without a second thought, as though kinship could be revoked by majority rule. A flicker of something cold and determined sparked in my chest. I glanced around at each face, searching for a glimmer of discomfort, some remnant of the sister or mother or cousin who once loved me unconditionally. But there was none. Only triumphant smugness and the smug approval of the crowd. In that electric silence, I realized the story didn't end here. This was only the opening act. The real reckoning was yet to come. I reached into my bag, heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it, and slid a thick manila folder across the polished oak table. The single, crisp thunk of its weight against the wood snapped the laughter in half and drew every eye to the object between us. Natalie's rehearsed smile faltered into confusion as she leaned forward, fingertips hovering above the topmost sheet. "What is this?" she whispered, voice unsteady for the first time that evening. I sat back, crossing my arms, watching the color drain from her cheeks. Around her, the room buzzed with uneasy murmurs. A sudden tension so dense you could almost taste it. Joel, her husband, reached out as if to steady her hand, but pulled back when she jerked away. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted the cover page and peered down. Then her eyes widened, her mouth parted, and she let out a shriek that sounded more like a scream of terror than embarrassment. The chair behind her clattered as she bolted upright, ripping the folder open further until half a dozen pages fanned out like evidence in a courtroom drama. I felt a rush of vindication. This was the turning point I'd rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times. Her eyes flicked from receipt to bank statement, her lips moving soundlessly as if trying to cast a spell to make the pages disappear. Instead, every line item etched itself deeper into her horror. $4,500 for a family emergency, trip to Cabo. $2,300 for elective veneers. $78,000 over 5 years. She shoved the papers back, her hands trembling, and met my gaze without the slightest trace of triumph. Gasping, Natalie looked around, seeking an ally but found only frozen faces and stunned silence. Even my mother's smug laughter had died on her lips, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Uncle Mitch's wine glass hovered halfway to his mouth as though he'd been interrupted mid-sip. I let the silence stretch, letting them absorb the weight of every undisputed dollar I'd quietly poured into their lives. All of it, I said softly, voice steady. Every loan request, every emergency text, every unreturned favor. My words filled the room like a verdict delivered from the bench. Joel swallowed hard and picked up the top sheet, tracing a column of numbers. With a trembling finger, "This can't be real," he muttered, eyes darting to Natalie as though seeking her permission to believe. But she remained mute, mouth agape, her sisterly armor shattered. In that moment, I saw them for what they were. A family built on convenience and conditional affection, not on unconditional love. I let out a slow breath, my own trembling gone, replaced by cool certainty. "You ridiculed me for asking nothing," I continued. "Yet you took everything I ever gave." The folder's pages fluttered as Joel let them drop back onto the table. No one moved to pick them up. No one offered a defense. All I saw were the cracks in their façade, the first fissures of truth breaking through years of polite deception. And as the echo of Natalie's scream faded, I knew this reveal was only the beginning of our reckoning. I flipped to the first page and began to speak, my voice calm but charged. "Let's walk through the last 5 years, year by year, dollar by dollar." I tapped the paper with a finger. In 2019, when Joel hit rock bottom with rehab, I wired him $8,000 for treatment and lodging. No thank you card, just a text asking for more help 2 months later. In 2020, Natalie called about an urgent dental surgery. Turns out it was elective veneers, and I covered $2,300. That same spring, Dad's back gave out, so I sent $1,500 for surgery and physical therapy. By autumn, Mom claimed the heat bill was past due. I transferred $12,000 to keep the lights on. You'd think a small note of gratitude might follow, but instead came a joke. "Oh, lucky you with no kids to worry about." And a cold shoulder when I added a reminder to discuss repayment. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Then 2021. Laura, my cousin, got waitlisted for college, so I fronted $6,000 for move-in costs. She clapped for me at graduation, but never mentioned the check. In early 2022, there was an urgent family emergency. I sent $4,500, only to find out it funded a flash vacation to Cabo. In mid-2023, Natalie's car broke down. 6 figures on my salary later, she was driving off in a brand new SUV, texting me, "Thanks, hun," as if I'd been waiting to bankroll her life. By late 2023, Mom's credit card debt swelled to $12,000. I paid it off overnight. Over the past 5 years, those sums added up to $78,000 quietly siphoned from my account into theirs. Without a single repayment agreement, without even a heartfelt thank you. I leaned forward, voice dropping. Every bank statement here, every email requesting funds, every screenshot of me refusing a loan, and the immediate cold shoulder that followed. lives in this folder. I saw Natalie's jaw tighten as she searched for an apology that would never come. You called me bitter, alone, cold. Yet you leaned on me for every financial wobble. You acted as though generosity were my obligation, not my choice. You never bothered to ask how these transfers affected my life. Like the time I skipped groceries to cover Joel's rent, or put off my own car repairs so Mom wouldn't freeze in winter. All of that is in here. The grocery store receipts, the mechanic's invoices, the voicemail where Natalie says, "Guess you've got nothing better to do than bail us out." I let out a slow breath. What you're witnessing isn't just numbers on paper. It's 5 years of silent sacrifices, of my dignity chipped away by your entitlement. And while every one of you cheered when you pushed me out of this family, remember this. I kept records. I kept my pride. And tonight, I remind you why I mattered long before you decided I didn't. With that, I closed the folder one last time. The echo of its pages a reminder that love without respect is just debt in disguise. It began with a throwaway line at the dinner table. Must be nice to afford good wine, that cut deeper than any blade. Yet no one batted an eye as they laughed and passed the gravy. That tiny jab was phase 1. Backhanded compliments disguised as jokes, each designed to remind me of my advantage in a life without children or mortgage payments. You've got no one to worry about. They'd coo, as if my independence were a spectator sport they were free to critique. But that was only the curtain raiser. Phase 2 arrived with a casual text on a quiet Tuesday. Hey, can you co-sign this small business loan? Suddenly, my kindness became an unspoken contract. I wired money for a cafe venture, dental emergencies, car repairs, each request arriving with increasing urgency and a tone that brooked no refusal. And when I asked for repayment, or even acknowledgement, the air turned frosty. My generosity was met with silence, or worse, a scolding about my supposed bitterness. Invitations to family dinners vanished. Phone calls went unanswered, and their disappointment in me rivaled the expectation I'd always meet their demands. That was phase 3, the withdrawal of affection when I finally said no. The tight circle of relatives who once cheered my contributions now recoiled, treating me like a pariah for refusing a single small loan. Overnight, I went from family hero to scapegoat, as if the only role I'd ever played was the family ATM. I watched them trade concerned glances instead of warm embraces, heard the quiet whisper of condemnation in my mother's voice. "You're so cold," and realized that kindness, in their eyes, was only valuable so long as it served their convenience. With each request they unloaded onto me, I felt myself shrink under the weight of obligation until there was nothing left but resentment and exhaustion. Yet I kept giving, rationalizing that blood calls for blood, that family deserves sacrifice, until the ledger tipped so far I could no longer deny the debt to my own dignity. Tonight, as I placed that folder of receipts before them, I saw the shock on Natalie's face when she recognized her own words scribbled in private messages. "You're a cash cow with no spine." In that moment, I understood that my silence had been their permission, my kindness their entitlement. They neither saw nor respected the sacrifices I made. They only saw the open checkbook I represented, and now the obligation they built has become their downfall, because I finally reclaimed my most precious asset, the right to say no. As the folder lay open and the last echoes of Natalie's scream faded, the room erupted again, this time with raw, unfiltered contempt. "You think you're so righteous," Mom spat, voice quivering with anger, throwing our kindness in our faces. Uncle Mitch leaned forward, eyes narrowed. We were just saying, thank you your way. Cousin Laura added with a smirk. Maybe you're the toxic one, expecting us to grovel for every penny back. Their words struck like blows, but I refused to flinch. Instead, I rose slowly, letting the wooden chair scrape behind me like a gavel calling for attention. Let's be clear, I said, each syllable deliberate. Every loan, every favor I granted was done in good faith, until you turned gratitude into entitlement. I swept my hand across the folder's pages, scattering receipts and bank statements like confetti of accountability. Natalie's husband, Joel, hesitated, glancing at his wife's ashen face before meeting my gaze. Is this all of it? He whispered, finger tracing the bold total. $78,000. I nodded. Every request you made, every plea you texted me at midnight, every silent assumption that I'd pay, every bit of it is here. A hush fell, broken only by the soft rustle of paper as I flipped to the next sheet. In 2019, you begged for rehab money. In 2020, veneers. In 2021, tuition. In 2022, vacation. In 2023, car repairs and credit card debt. My voice didn't waver. It carried the weight of years of quiet compliance. I watched comprehension flicker across their faces, turning smugness into shame. But some couldn't let go. You're making this a spectacle. Natalie spat, fingers clenched so tightly her knuckles whitened. This is family, not a courtroom. I leaned close, voice low but unwavering. Family doesn't demand repayment of love. The irony stung, and a tremor ran through the table as wine glasses and utensils quivered. Then explain this, I said, lifting a single page. Natalie's private message calling me a cash cow with no soul. The collective gasp was instantaneous, as if the room itself inhaled in shock. Even Mom, who'd sat smirking just moments before, looked suddenly drained. Joel's face paled. He whispered, I didn't know. I let the silence stretch, allowing every guilty conscience to squirm. Silence is consent, I continued, and your consent turned my kindness into an unpaid ledger. The moral hung heavy. Speaking up reclaims power. I closed the folder with a decisive snap, the sound echoing like a verdict. I'm done being your bank, I declared, voice ringing with finality. Their cheers of victory when they voted me out now rang hollow and absurd. In that charged stillness, I reclaimed my dignity. And they understood that, for once, the silence would be on my terms. I watched their stunned faces as I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope stamped with my own neat handwriting. Power of attorney, revocation. Their eyes widened, jaws slack. Without a word, I laid the envelope atop the manila folder, then produced a second. Medical proxy. Revocation. A third followed. Emergency contact removal. My mother's hand trembled as she reached out, only to recoil when she saw the bold letters, effective immediately. I let the moment simmer in silence, the only sound the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. You've played fast and loose with my generosity for years, I began, voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. Now it's time you understood what responsibility feels like when it cuts both ways. I folded my arms and watched as Mom's eyes darted between the papers and me, her features crumpling with betrayal. I have officially rescinded any legal authority you once held over my affairs, I continued. No longer will you decide where I donate, where I live, or who cares for me if I fall ill. Those decisions are mine and mine alone. The room felt suddenly smaller. The chandelier's glow harsh and unforgiving. Uncle Mitch cleared his throat. Daniel, this is extreme. I met his gaze, unflinching. It's overdue. You voted me out of my own family tonight. Don't be surprised when I reclaim every last thread of control over my life." Natalie's lips parted, as though to protest, but no words emerged. Her earlier confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. Joel's hand hovered by the envelope as if compelled to pick it up, but he let it lie where I placed it. "I did not apologize for the money I gave," I said. "Nor will I apologize for protecting myself now. In your eyes, my kindness was an open checkbook. In mine, it was evidence that boundaries are not just for walls, but for self-respect." A cold breeze seemed to swirl through the room as I gathered my coat, slipping my arms into its sleeves. "Consider this the legal mirror to your moral reckoning," I told them, the words tasting like finality. "You destroyed my place in this family with a vote. Now I've destroyed your claim over me with papers." I donned my coat, each button done with deliberate precision, and brushed invisible dust from my shoulders. My father cleared his throat, voice uncharacteristically soft. "We never meant to." I raised a hand to halt his excuses. "Intentions don't erase impact," I said quietly. Then, as though stepping through an unseen gateway, I walked toward the front door. Each footstep echoed a promise. I would never return to that old role. Behind me, my family sat frozen, the overturned ledger of dollars and legal documents a monument to their own making. I paused at the threshold, looked back once. No anger, only the calm certainty of a man who had reclaimed his life. Then I walked out into the night, the envelope of revocation securely in my pocket, feeling for the first time in decades the sweet breath of true autonomy. I drove away from the cold glare of my childhood home with no destination in mind, the engine's steady hum matching the pounding of my heart as I steered toward the dark ribbon of road I knew led to the lake where Dad once taught me to fish. By the time I pulled off onto the gravel shoulder, the world was cloaked in silence, save for the whisper of wind through pines and the distant call of a lone owl. I killed the headlights and sat there in the stillness, the moonlight painting silver paths across the water. For a long moment, I did nothing but breathe, feeling the tension melt from my shoulders like ice under a spring sun. No calls waiting, no debts hovering in my inbox, just me, the crisp night air, and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. As the hours slipped by, I found myself tracing the constellations Dad taught me. Orion's belt, the Little Dipper, shapes that never change, no matter how much people do. When sleep finally claimed me in the driver's seat, it was the first restful slumber I'd had since before the wedding I underwrote, before the Veneers, before the vacations I unwittingly funded. I woke at dawn to a sky painted in soft pastels and stepped out, stretching limbs that felt unused to freedom, then laced up my old running shoes. My feet hit the gravel path in gentle rhythm, each stride leaving the past further behind. I remembered the therapist's advice. Small routines build new habits. So I brewed coffee in the mug I kept in the glove box, savoring the first sip without guilt or distraction. No one texted to remind me of their emergencies. No one rang to demand my presence. I checked my phone only once to confirm I hadn't missed calls, and then turned it off, slipping it into silent mode as though sealing a tomb on my former life. In the days that followed, I went to dentist appointments I'd postponed for years, felt the relief when the Novocaine dull on my lip, and marveled at the simple luxury of caring for my own health. I filled out a registration for a community volunteering program, something I'd always thought I might get around to, and found purpose in helping at the local senior center, listening to stories that held warmth instead of manipulation. I let my haircut go a little longer, let my beard grow until it framed the new face I was discovering in the mirror. One without the tight line of tension, one with eyes that no longer darted at every ring of the phone. Nights were filled with real sleep rather than restless half-wakings praying for reprieve from guilt. When the sun rose, I watched it over my new apartment balcony. No holiday decor, no empty seats waiting, just a simple view of rooftops and magnolia blossoms swaying in the breeze. Friends I'd drifted from mailed postcards, unprompted, just to say hello. They brought laughter back into my days without an agenda. And though part of me half expected the ache of loneliness to follow, it never did. Instead, solitude became a kind companion, allowing me to hear my own thoughts for the first time in years. In that quiet, newfound space, I realized that freedom wasn't measured in the absence of family, but in the presence of self. Self-respect, self-care, self-determination. At the end of that week, I stood once more at the lake's edge, sunlight dancing across the ripples, and felt a gratitude deeper than any I'd felt after bailing out my family. This was peace earned, not owed. And in its gentle embrace, I finally felt home. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a missed call from Mom, and a voicemail so shaky it sounded like she was crying. "You really mean it. We were angry, but we're still your family." I didn't respond. Minutes after, Natalie's name flashed on the screen. "You don't even realize what you've done. Joel's filing for divorce. Are you happy now?" My stomach knotted as I stared at the message. Joel had been her fiercest defender, and suddenly he was on my side. 2 days after that, Dad's terse text arrived. "You went too far. We all said things we regret, but this is nuclear." I imagined his finger hovering over the send button for hours before finally pressing it, weighed down by desperation. I thought I'd feel guilt, tossing and turning in the dark. But instead, I slept deeper than I had in years, waking only once to check my phone. Nothing. No follow-up apologies, no new demands. Just silence, like the calm after a storm has passed. On the 7th day, a new notification. A message from Laura, the cousin who had cheered at my expulsion. "I didn't know how much you did." She wrote simply, "I'm sorry. You were always the one helping." Part of me wanted to reply, to hold on to this olive branch. But I left it unread, savoring the validation without risking reopening the old wound. Then came a text from Joel himself. I filed the papers. Everything in that folder checked out. She lied to me too. You did the right thing. His words were unexpected. Proof that truth can forge new alliances when old ones fracture. By mid-December, the first holiday invitations began arriving in my inbox. Distant cousins asking if I'd be joining for Christmas Eve. Neighbors wondering if I'd attend the community choir performance. I realized how many social circles I'd abandoned under the burden of family obligation, and I felt a flicker of excitement at the thought of reconnecting on my own terms. But the real test arrived on December 22nd, when Mom sent a picture text of their empty living room. Stockings hung, but no presents beneath a glaring gap. "It doesn't feel the same without you," the caption read, dripping with that familiar blend of regret and manipulation. I looked at the image long enough to feel the old pull of responsibility before swiping it away, blocking her number without a second thought. A few days later, an envelope landed on my doorstep, handwritten in Mom's elegant script. Inside, 3 pages. Page 1 offered remorse. "We never realized how much we leaned on you." Page 2 unleashed guilt. "Dad's health is failing. Ellie is lonely." And page 3 revealed the hook. "We're selling the house, underwater on the mortgage. We just need a little help." I sat with the letter on my kitchen counter, letting the words settle like dust. Then I folded it, stood up, and tossed it in the trash where it belonged. Because this wasn't an apology. It was the same old plea disguised in sentiment. In that moment, I understood the truth of freedom. It isn't defined by the absence of conflict, but by the absence of coercion. The texts and letters, the regrets and realities, all echoed a single lesson. Real care isn't conditional, and true family doesn't demand payment. And for the first time, I believe that lesson with every ounce of my being. Since that Thanksgiving night, everything has changed. I traded the weight of silent obligations for the lightness of mornings I own. Waking without dread, brewing coffee that's just for me, not a hostage to someone else's crisis. I left my hometown for a new city where my name means more than a bank account. I found a job that challenges me without draining me, surrounded by colleagues who ask about my weekend plans, not my generosity. On weekends, I volunteer at the community garden and senior center, where I listen to stories told for connection, not manipulation. My apartment is modest but warm, filled with plants I've learned to nurture and art I've chosen to hang because it speaks to my soul. Friends I drifted away from have returned, not out of obligation, but because they missed me. And that feels different, sweeter. I've learned that genuine love isn't measured by dollars sent at 2 a.m., but by a simple invitation to dinner. A text that says, "I'm here." At night, I sleep beneath blankets I paid for, in a home that's truly mine, not a waste station for familial demands. When I glance at my bank statements now, I feel pride instead of shame, knowing that every dollar I spend builds my future rather than bailing out dysfunction. And though I once feared the silence would echo with loneliness, it has become my sanctuary, an open space where my own voice finally matters. I no longer flinch at the phone. If it rings, it's someone wanting to hear my laughter, not my paycheck. That freedom is the richest inheritance I could ever receive. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt squeezed by family expectations or found the courage to say enough, I invite you to share your journey in the comments below. Subscribe to join our community of resilient souls who choose dignity over debt, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us all. True family honors boundaries, and real love sets you free.